when I mentioned to Don that we were having 4 out of 5 of our commissioners in Sandoval County voting to support an oil and gas ordinance, his first question was, what about water? Do they know about the water issues? And then he took action. I couldn't believe it. As a geologist, he started making phone calls and also doing research work on the geology of Sandoval County. And what he found, you will soon see. It's a very serious issue. And then he made the presentation. And after he's had 15 years of management experience in the oil and gas industry. And so he put that to work too. And then with his presentation, he met with each of the supervisors or counselors and individually and made them aware of the critical water issue that we're facing. So with that, he put together, he's also had experience as a mayor for 3 terms, I think it is, Don. And so he had the political background, the oil and gas background, and the geology background. And by meeting with these supervisors, he was able to get the vote turned around to 4-1, saying we will. And Don, being very modest, is also very aware of all the work that many of us have done on this issue and greatly appreciates it. Currently, well, the other thing I really liked in talking with Don is that he believes that most politicians and civil servants and representatives are very concerned, and I would say they're very well intentioned, but not necessarily very well informed on the issues. So they definitely appreciate citizen input when it's informative. And over the last 4 months, Don has demonstrated to me a style of leadership that he first put together in a wonderful book. There's 2 of them, which Annie was going to get.
That's what I went to get,
Are they
and then I forgot.
Oh, okay.
That's all right.
That's okay. We can do it afterwards. Anyway, he has made a study of Lincoln's style of leadership and has used those principles in meeting with people. And these are now available in the library.
They will be next week.
Next week.
Takes
okay.
a day or 2 to get them cataloged.
Yeah. The second one just came out a week ago. And I really suggest you check them out and read them. And Don is continuing his work right now on these issues. He's been meeting last week. He's had so many meetings. He met with the Mid-Region Council of Governments Water Advisory Board, and also with NERCOG's Board of Governors, and with the Pueblo leaders. He's also been on Dave Earle's radio show. Next week, you're meeting with the Bernalillo City Council. So, very active. And with that, I'd like you to hear Don Phillips. And I think of you, Don, as a geologist, a leader, an author, and a very good person.
And we're good friends too. I want everybody to know that it was Pat that got me into this. She deserves any credit or blame that you want to spread around, but she did.
Well, no, it was really climate reality.
Well, that's
Yeah, that's where we met.
thank you
Let
very
us know
much.
if you can't hear. He does have a mic that he can use if we have to.
You're right. If you can't hear me, just yell. This mic is really bad because it has reverb and everything, so I'll try to speak up, okay? So if you can't hear, please.
Here.
All right. All right. You're the technical guy. You're a hydrologist, right? Tell me how that goes. A hammer? A rock hammer. Okay. As soon as we get this rolling, I'll start to use it. But anyway, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. You know, it's an honor to be here. I appreciate the turnout on a Sunday. Even the front pews are filled. That's really great. And we've got the collection box going around. It's great. So anyway, tomorrow's President's Day too. So appreciate the plug on the books, because I've been asked to do some interviews and so on. But I really would rather be here with you all to talk about an issue that's far more important than anything that Abraham Lincoln might have to say. But what I've tried to tell everybody from the very beginning, does it work now? Is it? See what? See? Can you hear now?
Let me turn it down, Don.
Okay.
How do you do it? Down there? Yeah.
Try and see where you're at.
Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. Is that better? Testing. Okay. What?
They still can't hear you.
Still can't hear me.
There it is.
All right.
Is that better?
My apologies. I'm going to go ahead and start, okay, and try to make sure everybody can hear.
Don, you can clip that to your collar, I think. Sure. I think.
The other part in your pocket?
Try that.
How's that?
Sounds
Can people
good.
hear me? Okay.
Perfect.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay? The back? Yeah? A little?
It's not working.
Okay, let me just start, okay? What I was trying to tell everybody, to me, that this was not an oil and gas issue. Not here, not now. This is a water issue. Got to raise it to a higher level. And that basically precludes Republicans sticking to one end and environmentalists sticking to the other. This is about drinking water. And one of the first things that I showed was a map of oil and natural gas production in New Mexico. And most of the production comes from either the northwest portion of the San Juan Basin or the southeast in the Permian Basin, also known as the Delaware Basin. This area right through here in gray is called a frontier area. And a frontier area designated in exploration oil and gas means there's no commercial quantities of oil and gas. It's frontier. You still have to go looking for it. So, let's see. Oh, let me come back. This is the Rio Grande Rift. This area is the Rio Grande Rift. It's a major geologic structure. I'm sure you've heard of it. And it goes from Leadville, Colorado, way down into Mexico. Okay? And you can see where we are in New Mexico, and you can see where Albuquerque and the Sandia Mountains are. This is the most important feature that I'm going to talk about today, because it's very different than where oil and gas is produced in New Mexico. Now, one of the things that the oil and gas industry is saying is that the oil and gas industries are nothing new to Sandoval County, and that's a little bit misleading. It's actually a true statement. Let me talk a little bit more about that. He said, when you look at a geologic map of New Mexico, the colors that you see here are rocks that outcrop at the surface, okay? So you can see up in the San Juan Basin, here's Sandoval County. Up in the San Juan Basin where there's oil and gas production, there are very few colors. It's pretty flat up there. I mean, very few rocks outcrop at the surface. But when you get down around Albuquerque into the Albuquerque Basin, it's a completely different structural style, different geology. It's filled with faults, lots of different rocks at the surface. It's completely different. This is a cross-section of the San Juan Basin up in the northwest. You can see it's a kind of a bowl-shaped geological feature. There's not a lot of faults in there. We know that the Thrust Energy, for example, wants to frack and horizontally drill in the Manco Shale because it's organically rich. And if you do that, and there, water aquifers are way up above. You have lots of rocks in between. There's not much of a risk of aquifer contamination of drinking water. And in fact, they're actually doing hydraulic fracking up there, and they're not contaminating the drinking water. This is a cross-section of the Rio Grande Rift. From Placitas over here, where the Mancos Shale actually in some places outcrops at the surface, across the basin. And see, the total different nature of this structural is, it's eye-popping, actually. So my response to that comment is unconventional drilling, which is horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking combined in a heavily faulted basin, is definitely new to Sandoval County. Another comment that came up was, well, the process of fracking has been around since the 1940s, has been done safely in New Mexico for decades. And also, a true statement, but misleading. Let me tell you why. First of all, the fracking that around since the 1940s pretty much has been vertical. Okay, you drill straight down into it. When you encounter a formation that won't actually flow easily, you frack it. You send guns down there to shoot bullets, and I'll talk a little more about that, and frack the formation close to the wellbore. What's going on now is horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking combined is called unconventional drilling. It's a difference between conventional drilling and unconventional drilling. So they will drill down through the formations, they'll case through the water aquifer, they drill down through here into the shale, and then they blast it, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. So this is a completely different type of fracking process. Okay? Now let's talk about the history of fracking. And actually, I put this slide together because there was some controversy emanating from some Placitas people about fracking. So I said, all right, I want to make this a little bit more clear. You know, you can, here's a map, a diagram from U.S. Energy Information Administration. It's the Annual Energy Outlook 2013. That's from the United States government. You can see the top there of shale gas. That's the big play going on right now, okay? I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but in the pre-1940s, fracking has been actually been around since the Civil War, when the first commercial oil well was drilled in Titusville. And what they would do when the formations wouldn't produce, they would send down in through the wellbore what they called torpedoes, or bullets, which were filled with gunpowder, explosive caps, and nitroglycerin. They blasted it. In the 1940s, Standard Oil and Halliburton used gel-based fluid and napalm and gasoline. Right. This. Now, when I say hydraulic fracking, hydraulic means water-based, right? Hydraulic. My hydrologists would agree with that, right? So when I say hydraulic fracking, I mean water-based fracking. So I wouldn't say that a gel-based fluid with napalm and gasoline is water-based, because it wasn't. In the 1990s, Mitchell Energy created a water-based fracking fluid almost by accident. They just tried it and it worked. So they started doing experiments in the Barnett Shale of Texas, and then in 2001, Devon Energy bought Mitchell for $3.1 billion, and Devon Energy was an expert in directional drilling of wellbores. And they started perfecting this horizontal drilling technology. They perfected the technology in the mid-2000s. Devon starts testing this on the Woodford Shale in Oklahoma and the Haynesville Shale in Louisiana, and they started having really good results. Now everybody's taking notice of it, and by the early 2010s, there's this massive new shale gas play going on all across the country. And you see that one line right there, 2011, you can see when it really started to take off. That's why unconventional drilling is newer than conventional drilling. Did I say something that you disagree with, Bill? Or
I did. I'll be back.
all right.
There's a seat upstairs there now.
Okay, now, what changed? New technological advances, and the keys that unlocked widespread shale development was the combination of more precise horizontal drilling and more innovative and intensive hydraulic fracking. We'll talk about the intensity in a little bit. But in this map, you can see in the upper left, those dots up there are where hydraulic fracking is currently happening. And down in the southeast, where the Delaware Basin is, the same thing down there. You don't have any hydraulic fracking where we are. So, my response to this is that this kind of fracking is different. There's a difference between vertical conventional fracking, which has been going on since the 1940s, and hydraulic fracking associated with horizontal drilling, and that's known as unconventional drilling, which is relatively new. Okay? Let's talk about this hydraulic fracking for a minute. One of the reasons that I thought it was important to state this is because Thrust Energy, who started this whole thing in wanting to do this, says on their website that their focus is upon new, unconventional, liquids-rich shale plays. That's a fact. That's what they're going for. Let's talk about fracking a little bit. There's three main stages. First stage is blasting fissures. A wire equipped with explosive charges perforates the well casing. They set that casing horizontally, and that creates small fissures or cracks in the shale. The shale contains natural gas, but the fissures are too small for ample amounts of gas to travel through. So the second phase, which is actually the hydraulic fracking, is where they go in and expand the fissures. A high-pressure mixture of sand, chemicals, and water expands these fissures. This is when they send us down under tremendous pressure, millions of gallons of water up and through there. They expand the fractures. That's hydraulic fracking, and then they extract the gas. The expansion increases the flow of natural gas, and the water mixture is pumped back out of the well, and gas follows up the pipeline to the wellhead. Okay. So all the gas comes out, but all the fluids that they put back in there also come back up the wellbore. Now let's talk about the water associated with hydraulic fracking. 5 basic steps. First, you got to acquire the water. You got to get the water first. Then you got to mix it with chemicals. Another thing to point out is that the United States government does not require oil and gas companies to tell us what they put in there. Well injection. This is the fracking process I just talked about. Then the flowback and the produced water. Then they have to do something with all that water that comes up there. You know, they separate the gas from the water and separate everything. What do they do with the water? Well, what they do with the water is they call it waste water treatment and waste disposal. They end up injecting it back into the ground with other wells straight down into formations that will take the water. And you've heard of the Oklahoma, the earthquakes in Oklahoma, right? It's already been proven, even the top people in the Oklahoma state government will tell you that it's this phase that contributes to the earthquakes in Oklahoma. Okay? So the oil and gas companies will say to you, fracking doesn't cause the earthquakes. Technically, yeah, they're right. But the fracking process does cause the earthquakes or contributes to it. Excuse me?
The amplitude of the earthquake.
They're relatively low frequency. They're nothing like California, but they're constant. That's what's surprising everybody, I think. The next one is the legal counsel for Thrust Energy said this ordinance does not apply to the pueblos. Well, this is a geologic map from the United States Geological Survey, and it basically has the water level contour of the main aquifer in the Rio Grande Basin. And you can see that it's pretty much, it shows, as most of the other United States Geological Survey maps show, that this is one continuous aquifer, all the way up from Cochiti Lake down to Berlin, right? What's an aquifer? An aquifer is an underground layer of water-bearing permeable rocks, fractured rocks, or unconsolidated materials from groundwater, from which groundwater can be extracted. It's not one great big pool like a swimming pool down there. It's filled. It's rocks. And in this case, this is a map that shows the closed basins, also from the USGS. But this is where you find the water aquifer. And you can see it's pretty continuous. Open basins that can contribute surface water to the Rio Grande. It's where the Rio Grande runs, okay? Look at this aquifer. You ran a little cross-section across here. You can see that this is kind of what it would look like. It's a little cartoon, but it's pretty accurate for our purposes. What does the aquifer look like? This is actually a picture of the water aquifer in the Albuquerque Basin. And they're made up of, you can see rocks that have interstitial pores where the water can be. gravel and sand for the most part, fractured limestone, fractured sandstone, and fractured rock generally. That's what we're talking about when we talk about reservoirs. And that's what you've got here in this house. Okay, this is a cross-section through Placitas. You can see the Manco Shale up here where they want to drill, and down here, and you can see that right here is the base of the tertiary water aquifer here. So when you look at the base of the tertiary water aquifer, you kind of go like this. You can see it kind of looks like that, right? That's in Placitas, okay? The main Rio Grande aquifer is continuous. It does not stop at the various Pueblo Nation surface borders. It flows continuously in the subsurface, and water flows downhill, as some other things flow downhill, right? And so will the harmful chemicals with which it may be contaminated, and that is literally a fact. The aquifer is discontinuous, separated by several faults. There's very little possibility of contamination. This is what the professional consultant with Trust Energy said. And I said, what are your qualifications? And he said, I'm a civil engineer. So what my response to that is, well, the separation of aquifers by faults occurs only at shallow depths closer to the eastern mountains like Placitas and the western margins like San Ysidro. The risk of contamination is very, very high. Okay, and these faults, while we're talking about faults, these faults are not just lines on a map. One of the commissioners said to me, oh, those are just lines on the map. No, wait a minute. These are fault zones with thousands and thousands of fractures. And let me give you a couple of examples to illustrate it. This is what a major fault zone looks like, going through serious different formations and so on. There are openings in there, you know, and what happens when fluid hits into those openings? Well, it'll go as high as it can because of the pressure until it's stopped. This is what a fault zone looks like in outcrop. Notice all of these little fractures here. They're called joints. They're not off. Joints are fractures that are not offset. And then this is what an outcrop looks like in a very heavily faulted rock. And you can see when you get to the surface, which is what we see here, how many faults and fractures are in there. This is what I envision every formation in the Albuquerque Basin to look like. That's how many fractures there are. Okay. Okay, so suppose we drilled straight down in and we do unconventional drilling and we drill across here and they do all this fracking and then hit a fault zone. What's going to happen? Well, it's going to go right up the fault zone until it is stopped somewhere. And people ask me about pressure. You know, remember the Deepwater Horizon? Remember when the well cap blew out and you saw that oil flowing out? That was caused by subsurface pressure. That's what was causing that. That's what we're looking at here, subsurface pressure, very high subsurface pressure. So let's take a look at this now. This is a picture of the Sandia Mountains from basically Bernalillo and at the river. And you look up at these mountains, and you see these rocks up here. You can't see them as well, but they're horizontal. You all know what the horizontal rocks look like, way up at the top. Those rocks were deposited at sea level. Okay? And then they were thrust up, and area down here was dropped down. And what I'm trying to say is there's a great big fault between those mountains and the river. Huge fault. And that is the eastern boundary of the Rio Grande Rift. And here you see it in outcrop. Here's, you know, the mountains, Sandia Mountains. Here's the big fault. Now here's something to take notice of. And I've been struggling to try to let people know how different this is. And those rocks up there are Paleozoic rocks. They're older than the Manco Shale. Okay? Manco Shale up there has been eroded off. But it's in the subsurface. And in the Albuquerque Basin, you have to go down 2 to 4 miles to hit those rocks underneath the river. Which means if you started at the river and you drove at 60 miles an hour straight down, it would take you 2 to 4 minutes to turn where you are in the basin. That's how deep it is. Between there and there, that's astounding. Which means it's heavily faulted, heavily fractured. It's really been moved and banged around a lot. Okay. Now I went into the New Mexico Tech, which is a great resource for maps and so on. And I pulled out one area that's outlined in red here. And basically, this is a structural geology map. It shows mainly faults and fault blocks. And I want you to notice Placitas is here, Bernalillo is here, Rio Rancho, Albuquerque. I want to show you a cross section that goes west to east, that goes right through Placitas. And that's what, there's Placitas over there with the mountains, and you can see all the faults. And as soon as I saw this structure here. See how it bows up right there? That's called an anticline, or a thrust block. That's a standard early phase trap to look for oil and gas. As soon as I saw that, I knew that that's where they were drilling. And my friends, the local geologists, said, yeah, that's the Ziana anticline. Okay, now I want to show you this cross section. Let's start on, break it in half. Let's go to the.
Show us again where's the oil they think they made.
This is the Manca Shale.
Okay.
Okay, this is the base of the tertiary water aquifer. You can see how the Mancas is offset.
Are those the discontinuity in there is just, they're just vertical disruptions in the strata? That's the faults?
Yeah, these are the faults. These are the faults. Remember, each one is a major fault zone, just represented by one line. Okay, so we go to the eastern side, and you can see where Placitas is, Placitas subdivisions. And what I did was I circled these circled areas where the Manca Shale is in contact with or perilously close to the drinking water aquifer. And I didn't even circle all of them, but 1, 2, 3, 4 real quick as you go in through there. And as you move over to the west, same thing. There's that anticline, okay? Look at how the Manca Shale is close to lots of faults and close to the water aquifer, base of the water aquifer. Yes?
I've been told that La Madera limestone is our main water supply rock formation. Is that true? No. Not?
I'm going to defer to the hydrologists.
It depends on where they're at, but
Okay.
If you're talking about like Placitas subdivisions or further to the west, it's the tertiary Santa Fe group, and
Okay,
so
I
it's
was thinking
unconsolidated.
of
So if you go
village.
back, can you go back a couple of, sure, right there. If you look in here, so the rocks that are showing up in here kind of in yellow, those are the younger sediments in the basin. And so when the mountain started uplifting and the basin started collapsing, and you started getting all these faults, when the mountains went up, they shed sediments into the basin. And so they filled it up with gravels and sands and silts. And over time, those cemented in places, and other places they didn't. And so the problem here is in this area, I mean, it's a huge trap, it's a huge basin, but because of all these fault zones, like Don's talking about it's very vulnerable to any kind of, if you start drilling in here, and you start pushing fluids and stuff in here and overpressuring it, you've got the water supply essentially right above it. And so that's what he's focusing on.
This is Bill Brown, who actually helped me with these slides, so I appreciate it very much. In fact, anytime you want to jump in, go ahead, as you know more technical stuff than I do. So. All right, so you come over to the western side, and you see this anticlinal feature right here that I was talking about. That's the Ziana anticline, and here are the areas that I circled where the Manca Shale is very close to the drinking water aquifer. Okay, sometimes in contact with it, it's certainly close to faults. Now, as we move south in the basin, I put these slides in for the Albuquerque people, Bernalillo County, to show them that this is another cross section immediately south of the one I just showed you, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas that you can circle that's dangerous. As you move down into the basin farther south, cross sections, you see lots and lots of faults, and what you see is the tertiary aquifer formation getting a lot thicker. That's what happens. It moves downhill and it gets thicker. Okay? But it's the same thing, lots of faults. There's not been a single documented instance of water encroachment by oil and gas wells in Sandoval County. my response to that was, well, yeah, but that's because there's been no unconventional drilling in high-risk areas of Sandoval County, like the Albuquerque Basin. And now these are the cross sections. These next two slides are the ones that convinced the commissioners. Okay. You haven't seen anybody come in here and hydraulically frack the Mancos Shale if it's right next to the aquifer. And what do you think's going to happen? You're going to contaminate the water aquifer, obviously. It's high probability of that. And it's the difference between drilling in this kind of basin and that kind of basin. Here, where you don't have aquifer contamination problems, but here you're going to have them. Then, another shot, even though the aquifer isn't in direct contact with the Mancos Shale is all fractured up. What if you hit one of those faults? It goes right up, just like Bill was saying. Okay? Okay, this is the major shale play in the United States, and it's going on all over the place since the mid-2010s, and it's because when you drill into these shales and you allow hydraulic fracking, your success rate is 95%. When I was exploring oil and gas traditionally, you drill down in there and your wildcat success ratio is 15 to 20% nationwide. With these, it's 95%. Lots of money, right? And low risk. So Pennsylvania's, I'm going to show you Pennsylvania up here. I'm going to show you some things in Wyoming real quick. The Wind River Basin, Pavilion, Wyoming, it's been documented that hydraulic fracking and unconventional drilling has contaminated the entire drinking water supply for Pavilion. Surface dumping, unlined pits, shallow fracking, and what they found in the water wells, a Stanford University study proved this, that there were carcinogens, methane, hydrocarbons, and fracking chemicals in the drinking water. And now these people have to use bottled water. And that bottled water is paid for by the oil company that screwed it up. What's going to happen when they go out of business? Who's going to pay for it? The other thing to point out is that this is a basin that's heavily fractured, and that it is perfectly legal to inject stimulus fluids into underground water drinking resources. Perfectly legal according to the Safe Water Drinking Act of 2005. Pennsylvania. You've seen these areas circled across here, heavily drilled, and every one of those areas that's circled is a different county that has water contamination because of unconventional drilling. And in Dimmock County, you may have seen pictures of this. People actually turn on their water faucets, and there's so much methane in them they can light them. And their wells are that way as well. And one of the reasons this happened is because this is one of the first big places that the energy companies went into, and there were no rules, no regulations. They were allowed to do whatever the heck they wanted. And now Pennsylvania's starting to change their rules. And what I'm trying to say is, we should learn from this, right? Other areas where they're drilling, the Michigan Basin, no problems with aquifer contamination, because it's a bullshit. The Williston Basin, where they're drilling the Bakken Shale, you've probably heard of that. They don't have problems with aquifer contamination, and they're doing unconventional drilling. Those basins look like that basin, the San Juan Basin, right? That doesn't look like, they don't look like this basin. The basins that look like this basin are having problems, major problems. And so here's the shale play. Across the United States, that's what's driving it. They've been doing it in all these places, and now they're trying to come in right here and do the same thing. And we can't let them. The reduction in barriers, monuments, and the Grand Staircase Escalante, which is uranium, this is mostly oil and gas, and then wanting to drill unconventionally under Chaco Canyon.
Yeah.
That's this whole process. That's this big movement. And what I've been trying to tell everybody is it's not an oil and gas issue. It's a drinking water issue. And that's why I'm here today, and I hope you spread the word. And if you have any comments or questions, let me know, ask, because, you have a real serious situation too. This is probably the most important issue that Sandoval County Commission is ever gonna deal with, in my view.
Don, see,
Sir?
where Thrust wants to drill, is that far enough? One of the things they're starting to allege is that they're far enough west that where they want to drill is west of the faults. Okay, well, that's.
No, it's definitely within the Albuquerque Basin, it's just not true.
Can you show us where they're wanting to
Well,
Do they show up on here? I guess
Yeah,
not.
roughly it's over in this area. It's over in this area. Well, that's right there.
Yeah.
It's the incline.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's west.
Who was the commissioner that did not understand this?
You can have somebody else.
Do you know
Chapman.
why you couldn't
Don Chapman.
change his mind?
Excuse me?
Do you know why we were able to converse with him?
Why change four of their minds?
I know, but I mean, with dollar signs in his eyes.
I can't really speculate. I don't like to say negative things about people, but some people are just bullshit and they don't want to listen. My whole thing was, I was betting that there were at least 3 commissioners that had integrity, and then once they heard the whole truth, they'd do the right thing. And you know what? 4 of them did.
You've created a pseudo debate. I wonder if there could be a real debate.
I would be happy to get out with that. I would take Bill with me and.
You guys would do wonderfully.
And Eddie Paulsgrove and a couple of other people, but they're going to want to debate us. They'll lose.
Well, I know they will. I think it'd be very impressive.
I just don't think that they will do it.
I know.
Yeah.
We're going to have problems with our water apart from the hydraulic fracture. We have problems with water in Placitas and the environment because we're going to have a major drought that's going to take out most of the wells, a good portion of the wells in Placitas as things are going right now. And so this is all we need.
Well, that's something that the commission needs to take into account. And I can tell you, when I spoke to the Mid-Continent Region Water Board and the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Board, they understand that.
Good. Good.
Sir?
Question for you, with your expertise, what kind of chemicals are they using that they're not telling us that they're using in these fraction processes?
Do you want to answer that?
You're the oil guy, you know more about it than I do. It's just, they're pretty nasty.
They're putting really bad stuff in there. Let me just say it to you that way. I can't remember all the names. I've looked them up. When we were up in Pittsburgh looking at the climate reality, hearing all the people talk, they listed all the different chemicals and stuff, and it's scary. It's scary.
They're having high cancer rates.
Well, yeah, that's there are a lot of stories like that, and of course, the energy groups say that, well, we don't have any proof of that, and the mothers say, well, I got enough proof.
Excuse me,
Yes,
that's
sir.
not true.
Yes, it is.
They know the carcinogenic capabilities. I'm a PhD chemist, and I've worked for those companies, and I can tell you that they know that it's carcinogenic.
Well, I didn't say they didn't know. I said that's what they're saying. Okay. Back here.
Prince Energy, who are they? How long have they been around, and have they been at the forefront of other drilling areas that led to problems?
Thrust Energy, you can go on their website, you can look. I think that they are a land-based leasing company. They're not a big company like Mobil or Tenneco, or Tenneco's gone now, or BP, for example. I really think that if this basin had a lot of potential, those companies would be here. This company has got leased the mineral rights to 55,000 acres. And they've got a bunch of partners in there, and what they're trying to do is turn that acreage, in my view. I think that's what's happening. And so what they want to do is they want to drill down in here, hit the Mancos Shale, produce gas, and say, look, tremendous potential, and then they're going to sell off the leases and make their money that way, and then they're going to get out. That's my guess. But they're not a big company. They do not have a geologist on staff, from what I can tell. They just have a consulting geologist that's on their website. Yeah.
If they drill and they create all these problems and they go out of business, is this considered under, I can't remember which act, cradle to grave liability? Would we be able to fine them, or intercept us, fine them, and sue them?
If they go out of business, you can't sue. Yeah, and that's, you know, does anybody know about this, what's happening down in, eastern New Mexico with the karst and the cave and the collapsing and stuff like that? That's the problem they're having right now, is because the company that caused it declared bankruptcy. So now the state's gonna have to pay.
So the state is now looking for $40 million to clean up something that oil companies did down around Carlsbad.
How
And
much
they
did
just
that
got
lie?
30 million of it because the legislature just authorized 30 million of the 40 million they want out of our tax dollars to
How
try
much
to
does the
fix it.
cleanup cost?
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions, but billions, 30 million, not a whole lot of money.
Well, and that's part of the problem with potentially a company like Thrust. It's a small company. If they have any kind of problem, they just go out of business, they're gone, and everyone's stuck with it. And one of the things, you know, this is it. I mean, this is the only aquifer system we have, you know, for 800,000 people. And once it's contaminated, I mean, Don showed all those places back in Pennsylvania and stuff where some of the really early fracking happened. And I lived in western Pennsylvania, and I know that area. And aside from strip mine, coal areas and stuff, to all the stuff they have, I mean, it's pretty sad. And once it's contaminated, that's it, it's gone. Because it's over such a large area. And these, I mean, they show, again, as Don talked about, as a fault line, but they're enormously complex fault systems of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of subfaults and all here. And so when these guys come up and say, well, we can work around it, we can engineer around it, it's like, you can't do that. I mean, essentially the basin, it's like you took a whole bunch of glass plates of different colors on here, and you put them in a bag and you just beat the hell out of them with a hammer. And then you open it up and you kind of glue it together, and that's how complex it is. You don't know where it's going to break, how it's going to do this, you just have statistical probabilities. And that's the best they can do. And so, I mean, one of the things that Thrust Energy has talked about when they've gone to county meetings and stuff is, you people are just totally against oil and gas production. And we're not. I mean, Don was in the industry for years. What we're saying here, and what Don really talked about is, there's places to do this and there's places not to. And he showed the San Juan Basin. It's a good area to do this. There's not a lot of people there. The geology is fairly simplistic. There's not a lot of faulting or any of those things. So there's a certain risk associated with anything, but there it's a reasonable risk. Here, especially in, like where we're at in Placitas, if anywhere in the basin, we're in the worst spot in Placitas because we have all these small water systems and stuff up here. And the Manco Shale, we're kind of, if you look where we're at on this, we're like right in here. And the Mancos is right up near the surface. And it's just, we have so many faults and stuff in here. All of our water systems are susceptible to that kind of thing.
Have the probabilities been quantized?
Not at all. I
So
mean, when,
is there a way you can quantize them with a reasonable standard deviation?
all you could do is you would have to do enormous amounts of drilling. And it's something, I mean, tens of millions of dollars worth of drilling, and we don't have any of that. These are all projected downward. I mean, you can see.
Could that be a barrier to people doing that? If our legislature said you have to do this and determine the probability, it would be too expensive for them to come in.
You know, whenever we drilled a well in the oil and gas business, we always had a risk associated with it. We always had a risk associated with it whenever we drilled a well, and that they should be required to do this. We weren't required to do it. We did it because we wanted to understand our risk. Okay? This is so new. This is a new thing happening across the country right now, and it's even worse in a fractured area. That this is precedent setting that's going on here. That's why this is so important for the Sandoval County Commission. And the people in the Bernalillo County Mayor who I've talked to, and the other people on councils on the south, they know how important this is. And they want to do something about it. They're getting mobilized right now. But there's just nothing to look to say, this is how you should do it. It's totally new. That's why the citizens need to get more involved. Yes, ma'am.
What's happening with the oil and gas ordinance right now?
Well, the Stoddard ordinance is dead. It's dead, which, rest in peace. They're trying to determine what to do next, the commissioners. Yes, sir.
Stephen Verchinsky, I'm with the Green Party of the Albuquerque metro area. I've been at this for a little while. A couple of things to just note to everybody is that, one, we have the Bureau of Geology that is not going to be ready with their studies till the end of 2018 by looks of it, in terms of the issues of where all the fracking locations, well, not all the fracture zones are located in this basin. That's one. The other one is that they haven't characterized all the aquifer areas yet, and that's another one that the Bureau of Geology is planning on coming out with. That is separate from the contract that Sandoval County made for $62,000 for the petroleum engineer. That said, when you think about that, we've asked for a moratorium over that time period, at the very least, and the Pueblos have been asking for a 5-year moratorium, particularly in this basin. That said, there is a way of looking at this. My geology professor worked with the geologists that characterized the Santa Fe group of alluvium back in the day. He actually characterized this whole basin. That work was done years ago. I do have references for that. And that area is now also the Middle Rio administrative area under the state engineer's office. They recognize that as any of the surface or basically any contaminants in that area will eventually make its way to the surface waters of the Rio Grande, which then makes it down, of course, to Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority and the cleanup. My idea is that, and this is kind of almost far-fetched, but not if you're looking at it long-term, if you contaminate the aquifers here, then everybody has to go to other water sources. There are two major ones that are available. One is the Plains of St. Augustine, which is already locked up, and having America Waterworks Corporation, which if anybody here knows Jeff Sturba or heard that name, he is the CEO of P&M, who went over to America Waterworks, made $4 million over the last few years, and what they hold is the patents for cleaning up your water. Okay, so there we go.
I mean, there's places with other contaminants in North America, like when you go into California and stuff. I worked with EPA years ago, and a lot of those towns, like in Southern California, they've all have PCE plumes, and so they have to treat their water continuously, and it's expensive.
That's the key point. In order to actually clean water from hydraulic fracking, the cost is prohibitive in terms of being able to actually get drinking water out of it. So that's nonsense.
Right.
So it sounds like there needs to be accountability.
Well, and we have such a problem here is, remember those towns, we're talking like the city of Riverside or San Bernardino or whatever, they're big municipalities. They have centralized water treatment systems. They usually bring all their water up, blend it, they treat it all and out it goes. We don't have that here in Placitas and a lot of places. I mean, you know, we're all in individual water supplies. Okay, this isn't on. So, again, in the Placitas area, everything from the river pretty much, or from the highway east, we're not set up like that. Okay, small water treatment systems, we don't have the ability to do that. And, you know, like, it's a supply that it's here, it's a wonderful opportunity for people to use, but it's already being overused to start out with. And one of the things that's already occurring throughout Albuquerque and surrounding areas is we're mining our groundwater. Essentially, we're pumping out more than that nature puts in. And there's areas within Albuquerque itself where the water levels have dropped 150, even 200 feet. So if you look at the big eye, that, let's see, the northeast quadrant of that, the water's been pumped down about 150 feet there. So there's a lot of problems associated with that. The other thing is when you pump water like that, you start pumping you create gradients, and when you're pumping up near the surface, you start pulling water from the bottom up. Most of the time, the deeper water is less quality water. Higher TDS, total dissolved solids, you have other contaminants, arsenic and that sort of thing. And so that's another thing about fracking. I mean, it's like accelerating that process. What kind of PSI are they pushing into these? Thousands.
Yeah, it's unbelievably high pressures, and they use between, depending on how deep you go and how far you go, you're talking about anywhere from 2 to 8 million gallons per well. That's a lot of water for one well.
What's one well?
Where are they gonna get it?
Just an average well, like 5,000 feet.
5 to 6 million.
So
my guess.
$5 to $6 million, and the county has authorized $65,000 to look at this problem, and probably about 50 of it. Oh, dear.
Take your picture.
So, you're older than me.
Yeah, you're right.
So,
I'm really old.
I mean, essentially, the county has authorized basically $10,000 to $15,000 whole dollars to look at this entire problem with regard to groundwater supply. And that's kind of a joke. I mean, that's not even enough to pull some of the information that's together now on such a complex issue.
Don, I'll just mention to you, I still do some work in the industry, and I can't name names, but there are two very, very large O&G companies along the lines of the big boys you mentioned, and they're waiting in the wings to see how thrust does with this exercise. And so it's not just thrust, it's what's waiting in the wings behind thrust. So I gave some remarks. I give remarks every meeting. I've just been hammering this thing, and I gave 3 minutes of remarks. Anybody that wants them, give me your email and I'll send them to you. But I just focused this time. I don't keep saying the same thing because these commissioners get tired of hearing the same thing every time. I focused on Carlsbad. And as you know, we talked on the phone. I have a colleague named George Scott that is down there, very familiar with the area. He's a geologist and a petroleum engineer, and he owns fracking patents, major fracking patents that have been licensed out. And so anyway, the bottom line is that that whole mess down there, that cavern was created by the oil and gas industry. And George doesn't think it's fixable. He thinks it's inevitable that it's going to collapse. That's his opinion. And he can't even fathom what they're going to do with 30 million or 40 million to fix it. But he's worried. He's got a bigger worry. I said, how can there be a bigger worry down there? And he said, because there is a shallow saltwater disposal, a shallow wastewater disposal well operating down there under tremendous pressure, and it's very, very close to their aquifer down there that provides all the water for that area. And he has raised the red flag several times. What they're doing is legal, and he really sees an impending disaster down there, and he can't get people to listen to him. The industry has much more influence there than they do here. I mean, that's one of their motherships in the state.
Well, Lou, I really appreciate you going down. I think we all owe a thanks to Lou for coming out and talking about this, because people in the oil and gas business who know what's what have to speak truth to our power. So I appreciate it. One more thing I wanted to say is that it doesn't surprise me to hear that the bigger companies are sitting back and waiting to see what happens here with this experiment, because Shell Oil came in here back in the 70s and drilled a bunch of deep water test oil and gas wells, and they were all dry holes. They didn't find anything. So the prevailing attitude among the big companies is there's no conventional fields to be found out here, and they're right, because it's a late structure. It means it was faulted, the Rio Grande Rift was faulted after the migration of oil and gas, so anything that was trapped in there got out. It would be like taking the San Juan Basin and then fracturing up with the Rio Grande Rift. There wouldn't be any oil and gas left trapped. So the Manca Shale is the source rock for all that oil and gas. And it can't get out because it's in this tight sandstone that's impermeable, and the only way to get it out is by hydraulic fracking. So they're sitting back waiting saying, man, that's a risky area to go into because there's so many people that live there. We don't think you're going to be able to do it, but if you win, we'll come in. That's what's happening.
Amen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. What is your recommendation that we should take, the next couple of steps we should take after this meeting?
Well, I can tell you that from my perspective, what I'm doing, okay? I believe that the oil and gas companies only have to convince 3 people. They have to convince three members of the Sandoval County Commission. They don't have to convince all of you. They don't want to even try that. That's why they don't want to have a debate, right?
I'd love to debate them.
But they won't debate us. They won't do it, because they can't win, and they know they can't win. What I'm trying to do is take this presentation, going out and presenting to anybody that wants to hear me, that I think can make a difference. I've been volunteered a lot lately, and so I'm a little bit tired, but you kind of draw energy from this because it is so important. It's just the most important thing we'll ever do. Can't let it happen. So if you know the commissioners, if you know somebody that knows the commissioners, or if you get involved somehow to talk about this kind of stuff and get people involved, because after all, the commissioners, they report to you, right? They're your representatives. And you can have influence, and they do buckle, especially in an election year coming up. And they need to know that. Yes, sir.
Is this the same commission that allowed the gravel pit to continue for another 10 years?
Yes.
Somebody else can answer that.
Yes. Yes.
So that's your answer right there.
Well, and that's a situation where, I mean, they are letting them continue, but there were some constraints put on them, and I know ESCA put a lot of pressure on them.
And also, we have a new commissioner, Holden Rhodes, Jim Holden Rhodes, and he was the first commissioner who listened to Don and turned his vote. So Holden Rhodes is totally supportive of stopping this fracking.
But why did it take him so long?
He just was appointed, what, 6 months ago or so?
I know, but they're paid, and to me, it seemed like they were sheep following
No,
Chapman.
I'm talking only about our commissioner here in
I can
Placitas.
answer your question.
He did turn around.
Is this that when I sat down with Holden Rhodes, he had an open mind, and I showed it to him, and he looked at it, and this was just a few of these maps. And he said, my God, why didn't they tell us this 2 years ago? And the problem was that because I was a mayor, I know people in public service, they're not technical experts. And I knew what was going on is that the oil and gas companies were lying to them and misstating the truth. And that was my purpose, was to go in there and tell them the truth. And Holden Rhodes was the first guy that got it and stood up and did something about it. It was new. And then the other ones, it took me a little bit longer. Usually it takes 2 times, with this presentation. But they stood up and they did something. And I personally think that Holden Rhodes and Dave Heil and Ken Eichwald and Jay Block have a lot of integrity to do what they did during that vote. I really believe that. So this is what I'm trying to say, is that you give them the benefit of the doubt. That they don't know the whole truth.
Holden Rhodes caught on very quickly. When he came to the annual ESCA meeting back in the summer, Chairman Chapman was there, and Holden Rhodes referred to Chairman Chapman, quote unquote, as his boss. And now, well, he's come a long way in a short time, and he listened to you and drove it. and he and Chapman are at absolute odds with each other. I mean, they don't even want to be, they don't even want to be in the same room.
This is really serious business. I've been through this for the last 15 years or so in Boulder County, and I've recently moved here. Boulder County is just to the west of Weld County, Colorado, where there are more wells probably than cattle, and it's a very agricultural county. You have to get out ahead of this. Don't wait. Don't wait for another minute. I mean, when you go home, or even before you leave, develop an organization and a strategy. We developed Boulder County United, and they're meeting again at another county, at another council meeting Tuesday night to try to prevent the fracking that is coming west from Weld County, and it's coming at a breakneck speed. And we have a lot of very highly educated people, as you do here, who can explain things. But this is now political, and you've got to get to your elected officials with the information. I appreciate the fact that you're focusing on drinking water, because that wasn't a focus necessarily in the earlier days of the anti-fracking movement. I think this is a good way to go, because you're not separating people necessarily. You're very rational.
Bringing them together.
Approach, yes. So, but my message is, tomorrow morning you wake up and you'll find they're here, if they're not already. So, your official, if you say 3 people, then you move on, city councils, all the levels of political life here, which is a wonderful place to be here. Glad I moved.
Good.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good point to make is that when they had what they thought were 4 Republicans on the commission, they thought that they were going to push it right through, and they almost did. They almost did. And Holden Rhodes surprised them, because he said this is not the right thing to do, and he changed his vote, and he took a beating for it from the other commissioners and from the oil and gas industry. Yes.
With the commissioners now 4-1 on the right side, and very persuasive arguments, what next will oil and gas do, and how can we block that?
Well, here's what the oil and gas industry is doing. I really believe that what they got kicked back really hard by the 4-1 vote, took them completely by surprise. And now they've retrenched, and what they're doing is they're putting all of their eggs in one basket, and that's the New Mexico Tech Study. That New Mexico Tech Study is going to come out in May, and everybody's going to rally around that. And all you get, the reason I think this is because all of the people that were for this daughter ordinance are saying, well, let's wait till the New Mexico Tech Study comes out and see what it says. That's a clue, right? New Mexico Tech is funded by the oil and gas business very much. So that's my answer. Ma'am?
Kind of along the same lines. I'd really like to know what to do. So I've been in contact with all of the commissioners actually, but like what are we asking for?
I'll tell you what we're asking for. One of the things that I think needs to happen that they're considering right now is to put together a citizens working group or a citizens task force and keep the oil and gas special interest off of it. Put representatives on there that will represent the people and hear from the people, and put together a recommendation about what to do, and put together an ordinance that bans fracking, hydraulic fracking in the Albuquerque Basin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think needs to be done. And I think that's achievable, to tell you the truth. And the reason that I think that the commission needs to set that up is because they're paying New Mexico Tech $60,000 to do this study. They've commissioned it, taxpayer dollars, right? So it's at that level. We've got to have something up here with the people and say, okay, that's just at the same level with the commission to say, bang, we want you to do this and do it right. So that the citizens have an equal say in what happens when this New Mexico Tech study comes out and can counter it. And that's what they're considering right now. That's one thing that can be done. And then if we get that set up, we got a real good chance to win. Real good chance. The other thing is, we're talking about New Mexico, this state of New Mexico actually looking at this issue and maybe passing some laws to prevent it. And I'm not talking about banning all fracking, hydraulic fracking in the state of New Mexico. I'm saying you can't mess around with these water aquifers. It's too dangerous. That's what they should know, and that's what they should do. So action is my domain, you know. That's what I'm doing what I can do and what I think is right. And I think everybody needs to look at their own area and what you come up with new ideas. Like I said, this is unprecedented. Come up with a new idea to influence those commissioners and the state legislators and whatever else needs to be done. You know, I mean, I don't know exactly what to do. I know what I can do. Okay? Yes.
I have an idea, and it's a really old idea and a time-proven idea. I got dragged in. I'm not a politician. I am not, and I got dragged into politics by a former company a while back in Washington, and the solution, really, I was there, and here's the answer. Go ahead and bombard them with emails and phone calls, but they get that all the time. Fill the room at the commission every single meeting. They meet twice a month, and the study's coming out in May. That's not very many meetings between now and then. Fill the room up. The people that are filling this room should fill that commission chamber. The next meeting is on March the 1st at 6 p.m. and it's every first Thursday and third Thursday. Fill the room. You can email them, that's easy. You can call them, that's easy. It's not fun to go there and sit there for hours and hours, and they tend to put any discussion about the oil and gas ordinance at the very end of the meeting, way back there. By the time it comes up, 3/4 of the folks have left because it's late. These meetings have been going on when they talk about oil and gas, 1:15 in the morning. The night that it was defeated 4-1 was 1:15 in the morning when the meeting ended. But that's the thing that everybody in this room can do. Fill that room up, because your physical presence speaks volumes that you took time out of your evening, out of your life to go there and sit there and listen to a lot of things that are not of interest to you, to hear what is of interest. And also, you can sign up to speak, and anybody that signs up to speak gets 3 minutes. And they'll give you that 3 minutes, and they'll listen. And a lot of people would rather do anything than speak in public, you know. But do it anyway. Do it anyway. Get up there, and it doesn't matter what you say. It's a matter that you're up there saying it and telling them what you support and what you're against, because they listen in live time, in real time, when you're there in person.
I think it's 10 after 3, and I know there are a few people who are hoping that this is going to start again at 3. And so I'm not sure whether we can continue with questions and answers and just. Well, there were about 4 or 5 people that I know of, not 40. And so I'm wondering if there are people who might be ready to leave this room and others can come in and the questions and answers could continue, or how people want to handle it.
I'm staying as long as you guys want me to. I'd be happy to make another presentation.
What I can corral.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, there's a gentleman back here that's coming today.
Just one thing that I wanted to mention was This state has no environmental impact review process at all, zero. If anybody would like to work with us to go ahead and work on a draft piece of legislation for the folks up in Santa Fe, to actually have our own state Environmental Quality Act, I think that that is one thing. We were placed at such a disadvantage over there at Sandoval County because we didn't have the information on anything. And so you're having to go ahead and find all this stuff, where in other places in the country, you can go and look at 800 to 1,000 pages on any given county's review of what's going on and how everything's being impacted. Here, nothing.
Not true. Peggy Johnson, for instance, is a hydrologist that's done this same work back in the 90s. And it's very frustrating to me that we keep trying and trying and trying, and we have to do it over and over and over
Exactly.
again.
I am so delighted to meet you. Your paper was fantastic.
What kind of expertise do you need?
No, I'm
Well,
not
you
Peggy
need
Johnson.
everybody
but
that
I'm
needs to go
close.
ahead and